So it seemed to me that they had one rule for non-CBT trials and another for the CBT trials. So here we have some factual errors. We have decisions which meant that the non-CBT trials were being downgraded using methods which certainly need an explanation. If transformation is not acceptable for one group of treatments, it shouldn't be acceptable for the other. There are a number of other minor abnormalities. Errors, for instance, the HAD, they weren't aware that that refers to the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale. They wrote it down as Hamilton Anxiety and Depression Scale, and we alerted them to it and they didn't correct that. That isn't a major problem. It's when the information that they use means that they make recommendations which limit practitioners and means that patients are not offered treatments which might be helpful, that it becomes a problem. If we look at the effect of CBT and GET, and I'll take them together, and you compare them with alternatives like mine, you can use a number of different measures. The CRD themselves have tended to favour Cohen's delta, also known as Cohen's D. And it gives you an indication which you can use in addition to all the other results, and you use in addition to all the other results. And I reanalyzed my data with the help of a statistician and a professor who had written a textbook on statistics. We got slightly different results because modern day statistics have changed, and people think differently now about ways in which they deal with missing data. But still, using those results, I have significant differences which meet the criteria for a positive overall effect. In 2001, the CRD review, which was published in JAMA, judged the treatment which I had assessed to have an effect and a positive overall effect. By the time it came to the NICE guidelines, it no longer had a positive overall effect, although I had no new data based on exactly the same information, and there had been no communication between us. So somehow or other I'd been downgraded and there was no obvious reason. Having reanalyzed the data, I have a significant difference for fatigue and for self-efficacy and for anxiety. So I meet the criteria which are set in the guidelines of 2007, which I think would have been used. And I'll read it to you. Studies were judged to show some effect of treatment if any of the outcome measured showed a statistically significant difference between the intervention and control groups. Studies were classified as having an overall effect, positive or negative, if they showed a statistically significant effect for more than one clinical, i.e. not a physiological laboratory outcome, or if only one clinical outcome was measured, it was found to show a statistically significant effect. The effect was considered to be positive if the intervention group showed a greater improvement than the control group. And that's exactly what I found on 3 outcome measures. So you think, well, on that basis, here we have one study which is pragmatic, which provides patients with medical care, plus information on how to cope with their illness, plus support, plus advice about activity management, and in this case that was pacing. And the Cohen's D for the measures, well, for fatigue it was 0.83, which indicates a large effect. For somatic symptoms, there wasn't a significant difference between the group. There's what we call a trend, 0.06, so it just missed significance. But Cohen's d was 0.66, which is moderate effect. For self-efficacy, it was 0.74, again, a moderate effect. And for depression, it was 0.63, again, a moderate effect. Sometimes you get huge significant differences between groups, but Cohen's d is actually quite small. Small is 0.2, moderate effect is about 0.5 plus, large effect is 0.8. Now, somebody much cleverer than me compared all the trials that he could find and used all the outcome measures and looked at Cohen's d and found that for CBT and graded exercise, the average Cohen's d was about 0.48 or 0.49. The Cohen's d for graded exercise was slightly less, and for all the trials which used the Oxford definition to select their patients, it was also less. So if you compare CBT trials with the kind of alternatives which are not based on the CBT model, you get similar effect sizes. There's another study which was omitted from the review and which should have been included by Taylor et al. And they also had a multi-component program which included support and pacing and counselling, didn't require you to really change your beliefs about etiology, that is the causes of ME. And their Cohen's d were also moderate on 2 outcome measures. So that should have been included, which gives us 2 controlled trials. I believe Taylor et al. Was a randomized controlled trial, so that's even better evidence. And that means that NICE should have included these alternative trials as an additional option. Instead, they included activity management, which is something which I cannot differentiate from CBT and GET. I asked the GDG to provide me with evidence which justified the inclusion of graded exercise activity management, and they alerted us to the evidence in Appendix 1. But to my knowledge, Appendix 1 doesn't have a separate section on activity management. It seems that they used the trials for CBT and GET. They did not identify the studies used for activity management, which means they breached their own criteria for the inclusion of specific recommendations. And that is strange given the fact that they had an alternative. Other factual errors included, for instance, the Woolman study, which was an RCT, good evidence. It assessed pacing. They classified it under graded exercise therapy. Now, this suggested to us that they had confused graded exercise and pacing, that they weren't clear what pacing was. It was explained in the introduction. In fact, the word pacing is in the first line of the abstract. We alerted them to the error. They did not correct it. But Woolman's study provided further evidence that pacing is useful and it would have met their criteria. So we have a third study which showed that an alternative to CBT-GET should have been included.